Portal is a game about cake. Well, no. It's a game about solving puzzles, playing with physics, and progressing through different test chambers using portals with the promise of getting some cake. The Portal games are probably some of the most famous puzzle games out there, and it's really not hard to see why. These games honestly don't have many flaws. The gameplay is immaculate, the story is brilliant, and my god, the characters are just something else entirely. Generally, the only criticism I ever see of Portal is that it's pretty damn short, even if you've never seen any of the puzzles before. But even then, the game knows what it wants to do, and does it with fantastic pacing throughout. Portal started its life by not being Portal. The game was initially created by a group of students and was originally called Narbacular Drop, where you play as a princess, trying to escape a dungeon. Yeah, it's a pretty different vibe to the science atmosphere that Portal ended up with. After the team gave a presentation, Gabe Newell was impressed, and offered them jobs at Valve to keep developing the game, and this is where Portal was born. The dungeon was swapped out for testing chambers, the portals were given a whole new look with their blue and orange colours, and the main character became Chell, who is not a princess. Probably. And this is all well and good, but how and why did this game become as iconic as it did? I mean, yeah, it's got a unique and cool concept, but is that alone enough for it to still be relevant to so many people so many years later? Well, I'm hardly going to say yes now, am I? Portal has a load of different mechanics. Obviously, the portals take centre stage, but on top of that we've got all sorts of different things to consider, depending on what each test chamber allows for. Some chambers need you to guide energy balls around, some need you to collect weighted cubes to hold buttons down, some let you play around with momentum and fling yourself across the map. Christ, some even give you war flashbacks.
Hey, it's me! Don't shoot! Stop shooting! Ow, 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 ow!
But the thing that holds all of the different gameplay elements together is your portal gun. Upon starting the game, you wake up in a small pod with a bed, a radio, and a toilet. None of these are important unless you're a speedrunner. We are introduced to two things here. The first is GLaDOS, we'll talk about her more later, and the second is portals. Who'd have guessed? The game has this great little way of introducing you to its mechanics in a way that feels so natural, and this is because there is a real focus on easing the player into the game. We don't get to create portals right away, but we do get to go through them and figure out what their deal is. From there, we go through to a room where we are supposed to hold down a button with a weighted cube, so that the door can open and we can go through. This seems completely obvious because, well, it is. But the game has cleverly taught us what portals do, what buttons do, what the blue dotted lines mean, and how the cubes can interact with other chamber elements. This chamber wasn't supposed to show us how great the puzzles are going to be. It was so that when we do start getting into the real game, we already know exactly what we are doing. The next chamber is the first actual puzzle chamber with a number, and focuses more on teaching us about the potential of portals. But it's not until chamber 2 that we actually get to place them. Well, we can place blue ones. Again, the game is slowly getting us used to all of its mechanics, and so restricting us to only being able to place blue portals while it takes care of the orange ones for us makes more sense. Hey, at least I can use blue portals to rebel against my captors. Yeah, this should put me up there with William Wallace and Owain Glyndŵr. The game keeps us in this state for a while. In fact, it isn't until chamber 11 when we finally get our hands on the orange portals. While it might initially seem that the game is absolutely spoon-feeding its puzzles to us by only letting us do half of the solving, I'd argue that it's not. See, every chamber up until now has had something completely different to show us, while being a tool to help prepare us for the rest of the game. These puzzles are also still on the whole pretty decent puzzles, especially for people that don't know what things like these energy balls can do, or how momentum works in the game. That being said though, once we do get both portals, the game becomes so much more. Right from the get-go, we are being thrown into test chambers that completely up how much of our brain we need to have switched on. We start needing to place portals on the move, have multiple different things to do in a single chamber, and tend to be in much bigger testing chambers in general. These sorts of puzzles are genuinely pretty challenging, even if you have played the game before, and they only continue to ramp up from here. Throughout the rest of the game, our problem solving skills are consistently getting tested, because each chamber presents something completely different and unique to us than the last. But on top of that, many chambers will also test our actual movement abilities, whether it be something as simple as moving around and placing cubes, or avoiding energy balls, or flinging ourselves through the air. Not to mention that, at some points, our actual body is a crucial part to actually completing the puzzles. Actually beating the puzzles in this game gives me such a dopamine rush, because, especially in these later puzzles, the chambers would really get my brain into this problem-solving mindset. And so when I figured out every element of the puzzle and put it all into motion, I'd feel this wave of accomplishment, right before it throws me into the next chamber, where we do it all over again. All of this stuff makes for a fantastic puzzle game, but what really makes Portal special is its story. The puzzle game genre is really not one that needs to rely on a good story, or any sort of world building at all. In an FPS game, these things are usually the motivation you have to go off and shoot someone or something, in any single player mode. Platformers are greatly helped by having a reason for jumping around, and a visual novel without a story would essentially be this. But when it comes to puzzle games, all of the motivation that you need is the fact that it feels f***ing great for everyone you beat. That being said though, Portal wouldn't be Portal without all of the story, character, and atmosphere elements that it has going on right from the start. Again, we start out in our little pod. The first thing that we agreed to is a timer counting down from 1 minute and this little jingle on the radio. This brings me so much happiness. But other than that, there is this noticeable white noise in the background. This sort of white noise is present throughout the entire game, whether it's this sort of airflow noise, or the hum of machinery, or the buzzing of electricity. It creates such an eerie feeling to the game, which only goes to enhance the question of, where the f*** even am I? Which I'm imagining Chell is asking throughout the entire game. It only takes about 20 seconds before we meet GLaDOS, the main character in this game other than ourselves. Although initially, it isn't too clear whether this is an actual intelligence speaking to us, or if it's a robot voice reading from a pre-coded script. After all, it does kinda sound like she's booting up near the start.
Hello, and again, welcome to the Aperture Science Computer Aided Enrichment Center.
But it doesn't take long until she starts speaking to us about specifics, indicating that she, whatever she is consciously speaking to us. Every time I have one of my little rebellions, she has something to say about it.
Certain objects may be vital to your success. Do not destroy testing apparatus.
GLaDOS acts as a bit of a guide for a lot of these earlier stages, and helps to explain a few things to us. But it's soon clear that she's not necessarily on our side for any of this. Her lying about a test being impossible shows that she is a part of these little tests, and is intentionally making things more difficult. We get to see more of GLaDOS' real personality as we progress through the game. When we first get the orange portals, she's very quick to squelch any sort of self-esteem that we might have held on to up until this point.
The device is now more valuable than the organs and combined incomes of everyone in subject hometown here.
While also avoiding acknowledging any personal information about us, which would only go to dehumanize us even more. Throughout the game, her comments don't get any more pleasant. In fact, at one point she tells us that,
When the testing is over, you will be missed.
Whoa, what does missed mean? Strangely, GLaDOS actually comes as a sort of comfort while playing. Most of the puzzle solving is done with this white noise playing, in rooms that are clearly supposed to have this cleanly science look to them, but have seen better days. You can also notice that there are these windowed rooms that were created for people to watch over them while they played the test chambers. But what is even weirder is that, even though the windows are blurred, you can still clearly see that nobody's actually in them. All of this just adds to this unnerving feeling that the entire game can often have, to the point where hearing GLaDOS talk down to us actually comes as a bit of a relief. At least here we're getting some sort of communication, or just anything that isn't the constant sound of buzzing coming from the lights. She even tells us that we're going to get cake when we complete all the tests, so that's pretty friggin' exciting if you ask me. It's pretty uncommon for a puzzle game to evoke this sort of feeling from the player, but damn does Portal manage to pull it off perfectly. Thankfully though, this is all just in our minds, and there is absolutely nothing to, oh my god, what is this? Any sort of unnerved feeling is absolutely validated as we start finding what have been dubbed as rat dens by the community. For a bit of context, there is a character in the Portal series called Doug Ratman. We don't see him at all in the actual games, but we sometimes find these little areas that he's left behind for us. Ratman is the only scientist that is known to have survived in the Aperture Science Enrichment Center. In this first den that we find, we see this iconic phrase, "the cake is a lie." Ah, well, that excitement was short-lived. Along with a bunch of other mad scribblings. These rat dens, in my opinion, are what really set this uneasy feeling while playing the game. On top of the obvious distrust we should now have for GLaDOS and her promise of cake, we also now get to see what is going on behind the scenes, and it's honestly scarier than the normal test chambers. Dirty walls and rusted metal, along with this red abyss. It really helps to build the world outside of these test chambers, and set in this dire feeling. This is also a chamber that is filled with these turret robots that we have to knock over. And by now it's pretty obvious that GLaDOS doesn't care if we live or die. Actually, I think she'd prefer it if we did die. So these turrets feel much more sinister to us. The next chamber introduces us to the companion cube, which we will take along with us and use for this entire testing chamber. In this chamber, we find yet another rat den, and it starts to become more clear that we are supposed to align with whatever this dude is telling us. You know, scribbles of cameras with "she's watching you" next to them have never really filled me with that much confidence. There are also lots of photos of the companion cube, which shows that it's something that we're supposed to trust, or love, I guess. Anyway, GLaDOS forces us to incinerate the companion cube before telling us how quickly we were to abandon it. So, there goes that, I guess. These couple of chambers really help to set in this feeling of distrust that we are supposed to have. It is no longer just a puzzle game, this is an entire survival and escape mission. What is really amazing though, is how throughout all of this, the game starts to take on a more horror vibe. There are no jump scares to speak of, and initially none of the background noise screams anticipation, but as the game reveals little bits of information, we know that something is up. And all of those elements that have been there since the beginning have completely different effects on us now. The white noise feels more sinister, GLaDOS starts to become a much scarier opponent, and we know that outside of these off-white walls is just machinery and unknown. When we beat the final chamber, we are on a conveyor belt, and pretty quickly, it's apparent that we're not really supposed to survive this for much longer. With a little bit of quick thinking, we are able to avoid our untimely death, and for the first time in the game, we are able to defy GLaDOS. This is where the game gets really fun, and where GLaDOS becomes much more unhinged. She immediately starts getting desperate and tries to lie to you about not actually wanting to kill you, despite just telling you that she was gonna kill you. The rest of the game becomes this fantastic escape sequence as you travel through all of the machinery and the places you were never supposed to see. GLaDOS still tries to communicate with you whenever she can, getting more desperate and asking where you are. We see a side of GLaDOS that we've not seen until now. All her desperate pleas for you to come back to the testing area, while we traverse through what are, in essence, the same puzzles that we've been practicing for all throughout the game. All of the different mechanics that we've been learning up until this point come together. Momentum is used in a much more life and death situation, projectiles can be transported through portals, and of course any white tiles can have portals placed on them. This is truly the highlight of the entire game. What started as solving lots of puzzle rooms has turned into fighting for your life, while using the same techniques to solve puzzles in other environments. All while there's this sense of GLaDOS trying to track you down and figure out where you're going. We also again get to see some scribblings from Ratman, almost as if he knew we would escape and would benefit from a few directions and arrows. What a nice guy, eh? Once we get to the end of this whole chase sequence, which took us through all of the different pistons and machines that made Aperture Labs work, and even through the normal desks and offices that the scientists used to work at, we finally meet GLaDOS for the first time in the flesh. Well, not flesh. You get the idea. We managed to snag this sphere thing from her, and she immediately starts to try and convince us to leave it alone. When we incinerate it, she starts to glitch out, and then laughs. That's never a good sign. It turns out that we destroyed her morality core, which was installed to get her to stop killing people with neurotoxin. You will never guess what she does next. As the room fills with neurotoxin, we have to guide rockets back to her with portals and burn all of her other cores. It's honestly a pretty decent fight sequence. I love it when the final boss of a game can only be beaten when using the mechanics that it has taught us throughout the game, and so doing that here just fills me with this feeling of joy. During this little section of the game, GLaDOS becomes much more sinister and evil now that her morality core isn't holding her back. Her voice immediately changes, and while it still has that robotic twang to it, there is this hint of emotion in what she's saying. She suddenly sounds much more calm and cunning. At one point, she states that she would love to be able to kill us even quicker than she already is with the neurotoxin if she could. A character that was doing all of this for science is now doing this out of hatred and emotion. After burning enough of her cores, everything starts to break down, and, well, we win. There are so many elements to Portal that make it such a special game to so many people. For whatever reason, I first played the game in 2019. I guess I just never really got round to it until then, and by that time, I already knew about the cake is a lie and all that stuff. But regardless of that, I had such a fantastic experience, and now every time I come back to it, I still have a great time. One thing that it of course struggles with is replayability. I mean, most story-based games will get stale after playing them enough, but on top of that, this is a fairly short game all things considered, and once you know how to beat the puzzles, you have to wait a while before it's worth playing through again. I feel like the game would definitely benefit from having a few more test chambers to play through before you try and escape, but that is mainly because the ones we do play through are absolutely fantastic, and make me want to replay the game over and over. But, you know, I've already figured them out, and need time to forget them all again. Portal uses its general ambience and characters to give the game a really great setup to what becomes a really fun story and escape sequence. And the whole thing slowly gets a bit of that horror feeling to it at times, which works brilliantly. Even as someone that's not into horror elements in games, I can really appreciate what this does for the general story, and the feeling you have when solving puzzles. The actual mechanics in the game are just fantastic, and the progression is done really well in my eyes. Once all is said and done, we see Chell up on the surface, everything burning around her, and this is where the game ends. Wait, hang on a minute, what's going on? Initially the game was supposed to end like this, but was updated when Portal 2 was on its way, showing us getting dragged back into the facility. Then we get to see... oh my god, it's real. And the credits roll to what is one of my favourite video game songs. Initially, this seems like just a nice song from GLaDOS and her perspective, but when you start to pay attention to what she's saying... well, that can't be a good sign. But that is a video for another day.